Hi, crime enthusiasts. This is your host Ashita. The story I have for you today is about Gloria Levina Modi, a 27-year-old woman who was last seen on the night of October 25th, 1969, leaving a bar in Williams Lake, British Columbia. What was meant to be a short gateway with her parents and brother turned into a nightmare. Dave, her brother, had brought her from Bella Coola to the small city of Highway 97, a change of pace from the quiet rhythms of home. But the weekend took a horrific turn. The next day, Gloria's body was discovered in a secluded area of the bush. She had been brutally assaulted and left for dead. More than 50 years later, her murder remains unsolved. Her name is the first on a growing list of indigenous women and girls who have gone missing or been murdered along British Columbia's remote highways, a stretch of road now infamous as the Highway of Tears. Levina Modi, as she was known to her family and Nooksack community, was 26 years old when she vanished on October 25, 1969. A devoted mother to her two young children, aged 4 and 3, she was kind, caring, and deeply cherished by her parents, 8 siblings, and extended family. She shared a particularly close bond with her younger brother, David, who also goes by his middle name, Al. David, Levina's brother, said in a recent interview that he remembers her as a fun-loving and quick to joke with friends, yet at heart, she was a homebody who preferred quiet moments over large crowds. Oh, and she was a great mom who loved children. He recalls over a crackly phone call from Bella Coola. Levina had a passion for cooking and would often experiment with Chinese dishes in her kitchen. She also traveled along the coast with a group of Nooksack women working at different fish hatcheries, and in her free time, she played basketball. Her life was filled with family, laughter, and love. But on that fateful October night, everything changed. On the weekend of October 25th, 1969, Gloria Levina Modi was on a road trip with her family, a short gateway from the quiet life in Bella Coola. She and her younger brother Dave decided to spend the evening in Williams Lake, taking in the town's nightlife. The siblings hopped between several local bars, including the Lakeview, the Maple Leaf, and finally the Ranch Hotel. The Ranch Hotel was lively that night, filled with music, laughter, and the usual weekend crowd. After a long evening of drinks and conversation, Dave was ready to call it a night. He stepped out of the bar, assuming his sister was right behind him. But when he turned back to say something to her, she was gone. At first, he thought maybe she had stopped to talk to someone or had decided to stay a little longer. But as the minutes passed, unease set in. Gloria wasn't the type to wander off alone, and she always looked out for herself. Dave returned to the bar, scanning the room for his sister, but she was nowhere to be found. That same night, Gloria's family wasted no time in reporting her missing to the RCMP. Concern quickly turned into fear as the hours passed with no sign of her. Gloria wasn't someone who would simply disappear without telling anyone. Something felt wrong. But before the authorities could even begin a proper search, their worst nightmare became reality. The following morning, as the sun rose over the quiet wilderness surrounding Williams Lake, a group of hunters made a horrific discovery. Lying on a remote trail about 7 miles west of town was the naked body of a woman. It didn't take long for the authorities to confirm what her family had feared all along. It was Levina Modi. An RCMP report from the time described the brutal nature of her murder. The vibrant young mother of two had been stripped of the navy blue coat and yellow shift dress adorned with green and blue flowers that she was last seen wearing. Instead, her body bore the horrific evidence of what she had endured in her final hours. She had been beaten savagely, tortured, and sexually assaulted. The violence was unimaginable. The report detailed that she had suffered extensive injuries and, most disturbingly, she had been violated with a tree branch, a wound so severe that it ultimately caused her death. The cruelty of the crime sent shockwaves through the community. But despite the horror and the immediate attention the case received, no one was ever held accountable. More than 50 years later, Levina Modi's murder remains unsolved. Her name would become the first on what would be later known as the Highway of Tears, a long, desolate stretch of road that has swallowed too many indigenous women, grieving families, and unanswered questions. The RCMP has officially linked 18 murdered or missing women to the Highway of Tears through its e-PANA investigation. However, the true scale of disappearances along the desolate highways of north-central British Columbia is believed to be far greater. Indigenous communities, advocacy groups, and organizations like the Native Women's Association of Canada have long listed that the number of victims is much higher. When they spoke at the BC Missing Women Commission of Inquiry in 2010, they estimated that as many as 43 women had vanished or been murdered along Highway 16. Many of them were hitchhiking or traveling along three key highway corridors. Their disappearances largely unnoticed by public and often dismissed by law enforcement. In an effort to uncover the truth, the RCMP established the e-PANA task force in 2005, focusing on 18 cases of teenage girls and young women who had either vanished or been found murdered between 1969 and 2006. Investigators combed through hundreds of unsolved murder cases, missing persons report, and sexual assault files spanning 4 decades. Their goal was to determine whether a serial killer or multiple predators had been operating along the isolated highways. What they found were enough eerie similarities between the 18 cases to officially link them to the world now knows as the Highway of Tears. The unit's name, e-PANA, carries symbolic meaning. The E represents the RCMP's code for British Columbia, while PANA comes for Inuit mythology, the name of a spirit goddesses who guides soul to the afterlife before they are reincarnated. It's a fitting, if haunting, reminder of the women and girls whose lives were stolen along these lonely roads and the families still waiting for answers. Decades after their mother's brutal murder, Vanessa and Dan Moody found themselves sitting in an RCMP office summoned by investigators without fully understanding why. By then, they were in their 20s, young adults who had spent most of their lives haunted by the absence of the mother they barely got to know. The officers placed a heavy box in front of them, filled with photographs, reports, and cases related to Levina Modi's death. Vanessa still doesn't know why the officers thought it was appropriate to share such raw, painful evidence with them. There was no warning, no explanation of what they were about to see, only a cold invitation to open the box. The weight of it, both literal and emotional, sat between them like an unspoken threat. She hesitated, already feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. She looked at her younger brother and pleaded with him, "Don't look inside." She knew that whatever was in that box had the power to break them both. But Dan, desperate for something, answers, closures, or perhaps just a connection to the mother he lost, ignored the warning. He opened the box. Vanessa did too, against her better judgment. And then she saw it. One of the images, stark and unfiltered, captured her mother's lifeless body. The brutal reality of what had happened to Levina Modi stared back at her in black and white. The pain of her loss had always been with her, but this was something else. Something visceral, something unbearable. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. The air in the room suddenly felt suffocating. She couldn't take it. She bolted from the station, running as fast as she could, as if she could outrun the horror now burned into her memory. She didn't stop until she reached the river, but the weight of it all was too much. The shock, the grief, the overwhelming trauma. It hit her like a force she couldn't fight. And she collapsed, fainting on the riverbank. Dan, on the other hand, stayed. He had seen too much. The images of his mother's mutilated body, the cruel details of her final moments, etched themselves into his mind. There was no forgetting them, no escaping plan. Unlike his sister, he didn't run. Instead, he turned inward, drowning his pain the only way he knew, with alcohol. It became his escape, his coping mechanism, his slow undoing. In the years that followed, alcohol consumed him. The grief festered and the trauma rotted away at him from the inside. He was never able to shake what he saw in that box. Vanessa watched helplessly as her younger brother spiraled, knowing exactly where it all started. On that day in the RCMP office with that cursed box. Eventually, the alcohol claimed his life. One more tragedy to add to the long, painful legacy of her mother's murder. Vanessa had been on the same path once. As a teenager, she too had turned to alcohol and drugs, trying to fill the void of her mother's absence had left. She had tried to numb the pain, silence the questions, and forget the fact that her mother's killer had never been brought to justice. But somewhere along the way, she found a different path. Now in her 50s, Vanessa had been sober for over 30 years. She has dedicated her life to preserving the stories of her people, becoming a respected cultural teacher and genealogist in her community. She carries the weight of her past with her, but she refuses to let it define her. Her mother's murder remains unsolved, and her brother's death is another wound that will never fully heal. But Vanessa has made sure that Levina Modi's name is not forgotten. Through her work, her teachings, and her resilience, she continues to honor her mother's memory, just not as a victim, but as the kind, loving woman she was before her life was stolen. Lisa Black, an associate professor of history and Native American studies at Indiana University, gave a lecture on April 15th about her book, How to Get Away with Murder, unearths disturbing patterns exposing how Canada, the United States, and Mexico have allowed, in some cases, facilitated the disappearances and murders of Native women without accountability. During her lecture at Notre Dame on April 15th, Black, a Cherokee Nation citizen and associate professor of history and Native American studies at Indiana University, addressed these injustices. She began with a land acknowledgement recognizing the Peoria, Potawatomi, Kaskaskia, and Miami people, emphasizing that these communities are just not historical footnotes, but living nations that continue to engage in powerful ways. Her book examines 6 cases of missing and murdered indigenous women, revealing commonalities that expose much larger systematic issue. She doesn't analyze this crime. She interrogates how entire nations have, in her words, gotten away with the crime of murdering Native women. One of the most unsettling revelations from her research is the possibility that Gloria Levina Modi's killer were a group of 4 men. including a police officer who remains alive today. This officer, according to Black's finding, continues to harass and intimidate Moody's family, a haunting reminder of the deep entanglement between law enforcement and the violence inflicted on indigenous communities. Chapters 2 and 4 of her book dive deeper into the role of police in these murders and abductions, questioning not just their failures to protect, but their potential complicity in the crime themselves. For many families, this isn't just academic research, it is confirmation of long held suspicions, the proof of a horrifying truth they have known for decades. It is in reality extremely sad to think about these crimes. So many cases went unsolved, so many families left with nothing but questions, and so many women taken before their time. The Highway of Tears is more than just a stretch of road. It's a graveyard of unanswered cries for justice, a chilling reminder of how violence against indigenous women has been ignored, dismissed, and even enabled by the very system meant to protect them. Looking at the sheer number of missing and murdered women, two undeniable patterns emerge: a serial element and a systematic failure. When one hears of so many disappearances along the same route, young women vanishing without a trace, bodies found abandoned in remote areas, it's natural to consider the possibility of a serial predator or even multiple killers preying on vulnerable women along this isolated highway. Some of the earliest cases from the 1960s and 70s bear striking similarities. Women seen last hitchhiking or walking alone. Their bodies later discovered in the woods, often showing signs of brutal violence and sexual assault. Many serial killers operate within comfort zones, locations they are familiar with, places where they know they can avoid detection. Highway 16 and the surrounding routes offer the perfect hunting ground. The roads are long and lonely, surrounded by dense forests, making it easy for someone to pick up a victim, drive them far away from any witnesses, and dispose of their remains without fear of being caught. There's also the question of whether some of these disappearances could be the work of truckers, transient workers, or people who travel through the area without leaving a trace. Long-haul truckers, for example, have been linked to numerous serial killings across North America because they move from city to city, making it difficult for authorities to connect the crimes. If even one of the Highway of Tears cases involved such a killer, it could explain why some bodies were never found or why certain patterns remain elusive. But this theory alone doesn't explain the full scope of the tragedy. The bigger, the more insidious truth is that the Highway of Tears is not just haunted by the spectre of a serial killer. It is haunted by decades of neglect, by systemic racism, and by a society that has historically turned a blind eye to the suffering of indigenous women. From the very beginning, many of these cases were mishandled or outright ignored by authorities. Families reported their daughters, sisters, and mothers missing, only to be met with indifference. Too often, police assumed that these women had simply run away, dismissing their disappearances as unimportant. Some were wrongly labeled as sex workers, addicts, or troubled youth, as if somehow justified the lack of urgency in investigating their cases. One of the most damning aspects of this failure is how little action was taken for decades. Despite the first known case on the Highway of Tears occurring in 1969, the RCMP did not launch the E-PANA task force until 2005, 36 years later. 36 years of women going missing, 36 years of families grieving in silence with no answers. Even when E-PANA was finally created, it focused only on 18 cases, despite indigenous advocates arguing that the real number of missing and murdered women along these highways is at least 43, if not more. Why were some of the cases investigated while others weren't? Why did it take a white woman's disappearance in 2002 for authorities to finally take action, when indigenous family had been raising the alarm for decades? The Human Rights Watch report, Those Who Take Us Away, exposed deep-rooted distrust between indigenous communities and law enforcement. Some families claim that the officers didn't just neglect their cases, they actively mistreated the victims. There are allegations that police assumed many of these women were simply drugged, that they had consented to sex before being murdered, or their lifestyle somehow placed them in harm's way. In some instances, it is even suggested that the law enforcement officers themselves may have been involved in certain cases, either as perpetrators or as part of the larger cover-up. In truth, these two theories, serial killers and systemic failures, are not mutually exclusive. It is entirely possible that a serial predator or multiple predators have operated all along the Highway of Tears, exploiting the isolation of the region. But it is also undeniable that the systemic failures of the law enforcement, government policies, and societal attitudes toward indigenous women have allowed these crimes to continue unchecked for decades. Had authorities taken these cases seriously from the start, had they investigated each disappearance with the same urgency given to non-indigenous victims, had they provided safer transportation options to remote communities, perhaps some of these women would still be alive today. The Highway of Tears is not just a crime scene. It is a reflection of much larger, much darker reality, a society that far too long has devalued the lives of indigenous women. Until that changes, until justice is served and real preventative measures are in place, the ghost of the Highway of Tears will continue to haunt us. The families of missing and murdered indigenous women have been relentless in their fight for justice, turning their grief into activism. Refusing to let their loved ones be forgotten, they have led awareness campaigns, vigils, and walks along the Highway of Tears, demanding answers, accountability, and systemic changes. For them, this is not about only remembering those they lost. It is about ensuring that no other family has to endure the same pain, that no more women disappear into silence of indifference. One of the most significant efforts in this ongoing struggle took place in 2006. On March 30th, a powerful journey began in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, as families and supporters embarked on a walk that stretched over 700 kilometers, ending in Prince George. This wasn't just a symbolic march, it was a statement, a demand for justice, a plea for action. Every step taken along the highway was a tribute to the women and girls who had vanished along these remote roads. Every mile traveled was a reminder and the emotional tone of knowing that their loved ones had walked the same roads before disappearing. Along the way, communities came together to support them, offering food, shelter, and solidarity. Strangers stood at the roadside, holding up signs with the names and faces of the missing, ensuring that the spirits remained present in their journey. Some families carried photographs of their daughters, sisters, mothers, and aunts, images of smiling faces now frozen in time, reminders of lives stolen too soon. By the time the walkers reached Prince George, their numbers had grown. They were no longer just a group of grieving families. They had become a movement, one that no longer could be ignored. The walk culminated in the Highway of Tears Symposium, a historic gathering that brought together over 500 delegates, including victims' families, indigenous leaders, law enforcement, government officials, and advocates from across society. For many families, the symposium was an opportunity to speak directly to those in power, to make them listen, to make them understand the depth of the crisis. Parents, siblings, and children of the missing and murdered women took the stage to share their stories, the pain, and their anger. Some held back tears as they described the moment they realized their loving one was missing. Others demanded to know why their cases had been dismissed, why law enforcement had been so slow to act, why the government had done so little to prevent these tragedies. The discussions at the symposium were raw and unfiltered. Indigenous leaders condemned the decades of inaction, pointed to systemic racism and neglect as key factors in the failures to protect indigenous women. Community members called for better infrastructure, including safe and affordable transportation options, so that women would no longer have to resort to hitchhiking along dangerous highways. Victims' families demanded greater police accountability, faster response times, and thorough investigations that treated every missing woman with the urgency and dignity she deserved. While there was some acknowledgement from government and law enforcement officials that more needed to be done, for many families, the responses fell short. Promises had been made before, and too often those promises had led to little real change. The families knew that the fight for justice would not end with a symposium. It would have to continue long after the event was over. Though the symposium marked an important step forward, the struggle for justice did not end there. Families continued to push for action, holding annual vigils, marches, and awareness campaigns to ensure that the stories of the missing and murdered indigenous women were not erased. In the years that followed, the calls for justice grew louder. The issue gained more national and international attention, with human rights organizations and activists joining the fight. Reports such as those who take us away by Human Rights Watch expose the deep mistrust between indigenous communities and law enforcement, detailing cases of police inaction, discrimination, and even abuse. The public began to demand answers. Why had it taken decades for authorities to launch serious investigations? Why were some cases prioritized over others? Why did it take the disappearance of a white woman in 2002 for the government to acknowledge a crisis that had been ongoing for generations? Despite these hard truths, the resilience of the families never wavered. Many of the women's relatives became advocates in their own right, dedicating their lives to raising awareness and pushing for legislative change. Some worked to implement programs that provide support for families of missing persons, while others fought for policy reforms that would hold law enforcement accountable. One of the most significant victories came in 2016 when the Canadian government launched the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. While many saw this as a long overdue step, others remained skeptical, wary of yet another investigation that might result in recommendations with no real follow-through. The final report, released in 2019, declared this crisis as a Canadian genocide, highlighting the role of colonialism, systemic racism, and government neglect in the ongoing violence against Indigenous women. Today, the fight continues. Families, activists, and Indigenous leaders remain at the forefront, refusing to let the momentum fade. Annual walks and gatherings continue to take place, reminding the world that the Highway of Tears is still a dangerous stretch of road for Indigenous women. Memories have been built, names have been etched into place, and murals have been painted, ensuring the faces of these women are never forgotten. But ultimately, the goal is not just remembrance, it is justice, it is prevention. It is a future where Indigenous women can walk safely without fear of disappearing into the void of indifference. It is a world where their lives are valued, their voices are heard, and their families have never to wonder if their loved one will come home. Until that day comes, the road is not just a highway. It is a symbol of loss, of resilience, and of a promise. A promise that their stories will never be silenced and that their fight for justice will never end. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast on Spotify and YouTube so you never miss an update. I appreciate you joining me today. Have an amazing weekend ahead. Until then, stay safe, crime enthusiasts.